the shadows of a fractured life, where sorrow breeds in the heart of a young girl, Emily, a chilling tale unfolds. After her parents split, she moves to an old house, shrouded in mystery, a haven for a dark entity. School becomes a battleground, bullies her tormentors, but at home, in the eerie silence, she finds an unexpected companion, the entity, thriving on her fear and sorrow. As Emily's world spirals into darkness, the line between victim and predator blurs. Her pain feeds the entity, their bond growing stronger, more sinister. Lost in the grip of an unrelenting darkness, Emily faces a harrowing choice: to break free or be consumed entirely. This is a tale of fear, sorrow, and the unseen shadows that linger in our lives. Welcome to the haunting story of Emily and the Darkness. Emily watched through the car window as the familiar sights of her old neighborhood faded into the distance. Her mother, Sarah, drove in silence, the tension in the car almost palpable. The only sound was the rhythmic wiper blades, sweeping away the persistent drizzle that seemed to mourn their departure. They pulled up in front of a Victorian-era house that stood at the end of a cobblestone street. It was imposing, with its aged, darkened brickwork and towering gables. The for sale sign in the yard swayed slightly in the breeze, as if waving goodbye to its previous occupants. "Here we are, Emily, our new home," Sarah announced, attempting a cheerful tone. The house, while majestic, had an air of neglect. Vines crept up its sides, and the once vibrant garden was now overgrown. Emily hesitated, feeling a strange unease as she stepped inside. The house was spacious, with high ceilings and large windows, but it was shrouded in shadows, giving it a gloomy atmosphere. The following day at school, Emily's apprehension grew. She felt like an outsider in the bustling hallways of Westfield High. Whispers and pointing fingers followed her as she navigated through the crowd. In her first class, a group of girls snickered as she walked in, their eyes scrutinizing her thrift store clothes and unkempt hair. "Looks like we have a charity case," one of them whispered loudly enough for Emily to hear, setting off a round of muffled giggles. Emily's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she kept her head down, trying to ignore them. Lunchtime was no better. Emily sat alone, picking at her food, while the same group of girls sat nearby, casting occasional glances her way and whispering among themselves. She felt their eyes on her, judgmental and cruel. That night, as Emily tried to find comfort in her new room, the house's eerie quietude was unsettling. The creaks and groans of the old structure sounded like hushed conversations in a language she couldn't understand. She tossed and turned, her mind replaying the day's events. The laughter of her classmates echoed in her ears, blending with the strange sounds of the house. Around midnight, Emily was jolted awake by a loud thump from somewhere above her. She sat up, heart racing, listening intently. It was followed by a series of soft scratches, like nails on wood. Her imagination conjured images of unseen creatures lurking in the dark corners of the house. She lay back down, pulling the covers up to her chin, trying to convince herself it was just the house settling. But as she drifted back to sleep, a chilling thought crept into her mind. What if the house wasn't just settling? What if it was trying to communicate something to her? Sleep eventually came, but it was restless, filled with dreams of shadowy figures and whispered threats. Emily woke the next morning, feeling more exhausted than when she had gone to bed, a sense of foreboding lingering in her mind. Ah, my dear nocturnal scholars of the macabre. It's time for a quick scare break. As we linger in these shadowy realms, a small favour I dare to ask. If my tales of terror bring you thrills, do not let our journey end here. Hit like, subscribe, and join our dark congregation. Now shall we delve deeper into the abyss. Let's embrace the darkness once more. Let's get back to the shadows. The morning sun filtered weakly through the curtains of Emily's room, casting long shadows across the floor. She sat at the edge of her bed, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and sadness. She felt lost in this new, alien world, both at home and at school. At breakfast, Emily's mother noticed her downcast eyes and the way she listlessly pushed her cereal around the bowl. "What's on your mind, Em?" Sarah asked gently, sitting across from her. Emily sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why is life so hard, Mum? I try to say the right things, make the right choices, but everything just seems to go wrong." Sarah reached across the table, taking her daughter's hands in hers. "Life is a journey, Emily. You're at a point where your body and your brain are changing. You're transitioning from a child to an adult, and it's not an easy process." Emily looked up, her eyes filled with questions. "Your brain is literally being rebuilt. Think of it like a construction site," Sarah continued. "A part of your brain is having a tough time with impulse control and decision-making. It's normal to feel overwhelmed and make mistakes during this phase. But it feels like I'm just messing everything up," Emily murmured. Sarah smiled reassuringly. "It's a phase, sweetie. It will get better. You're growing, learning. These struggles are part of becoming who you're meant to be." Feeling a bit more comforted, Emily headed to school, clutching her mother's words like a lifeline. However, the day quickly soured. In the hallway, a girl from the group that had been tormenting her approached with a malicious grin. Before Emily could react, her backpack was snatched away, and a stinging slap landed across her face. Tears welled in her eyes as laughter echoed around her. Humiliated and in pain, Emily returned home that afternoon, feeling more alone than ever. She retreated to her room, lying on her bed as the evening light faded to darkness. As she lay there, the house began its nightly chorus of creaks and groans. But tonight, there was something different. Amidst the familiar sounds, Emily heard a faint voice, a sinister whisper that seemed to come from the very walls of the room. "I like the taste of your sorrow," it murmured, the words slithering through the darkness like a snake. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She sat up, looking around her dimly lit room, but saw nothing. The voice was gone as quickly as it had appeared, leaving her to wonder if she had imagined it. But the seed of fear had been planted. As she lay back down, her mind raced with questions. What was that voice? Where did it come from? And most importantly, what did it want with her? The days that followed were a blur of torment for Emily. The girls at school, emboldened by their unchecked cruelty, made her life unbearable. Each day was a gauntlet of insults, pranks, and physical intimidation. Emily felt trapped in a never-ending nightmare, both at school and in the solitude of her home. One night, as Emily lay in bed, her thoughts a whirlpool of despair, she felt an inexplicable weight pressed down on her legs. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked up to see a dark, cloaked figure at the foot of her bed. Its form was indistinct, as if made of shadows, but its presence was oppressively real. "I like your sorrow. It tastes so sweet," the figure whispered, in a voice that was both enticing and terrifying. "Who are you?" Emily screamed, terror constricting her throat. At her scream, the bedroom door flew open, and Sarah rushed in, flicking on the light. The figure vanished like smoke, leaving Emily alone with her frightened mother. "Emily, what's wrong?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with concern as she sat beside her on the bed. "I saw something. A figure." Emily's voice trembled as she tried to explain. Sarah hugged her tightly. "It's okay. You're safe now. Remember, your body and mind are going through so many changes. Your hormones are fluctuating, and it's causing spikes in cortisol levels. This stress hormone can cloud your judgment and make everything feel more intense and frightening. Emily nodded, but the fear in her heart didn't subside. She felt something sinister lurking in the shadows of her room, waiting for the lights to go out. The next day was a haze. Emily moved through her school routine mechanically, her mind haunted by the image of the shadowy figure. That night, as she lay in bed, the darkness seemed to thicken and the air grew cold. The entity appeared again, more distinct this time. It hovered over her, its form a swirling mass of darkness. "Your fear feeds me, Emily. Your sorrow makes me strong," it hissed, its voice a chilling melody that played on her deepest fears. Emily lay frozen, terror gripping her like a vice. The entity seemed to grow larger, feeding off her fear and sorrow. Its presence filled the room, suffocating and all-encompassing. She wanted to scream, to call out for her mother, but fear had stolen her voice. Tears streamed down her face as she realized she was facing something beyond her understanding, something that thrived on her misery. The entity's whispers continued, a litany of dark promises and sinister comforts. Emily felt the weight of its gaze, cold and unyielding. She knew then that this was no figment of her imagination. This was real, and it was feeding on her darkest emotions. As the night wore on, the entity's presence lingered, a dark guardian watching over her. Emily lay there, too scared to sleep, too terrified to move, wondering how she could ever escape the grasp of this malevolent shadow. The day had been particularly brutal for Emily. The relentless bullying at school had escalated, leaving her emotionally battered. With no friends to turn to, she felt utterly isolated. By the time she reached home, her spirit was crushed, and her heart was heavy with an unspeakable sadness. As she lay in her bed that night, tears streaming down her cheeks, the familiar, ominous presence made itself known. The entity emerged from the shadows, its form more defined than ever, thriving on her despair. "Oh, hello again," Emily said, her voice empty of the fear that once trembled in it. "At least I can rely on you to show up for me." The entity seemed to smile, a disturbing shift in its shadowy form. "I love your sorrow," it whispered, its voice a dark caress. "Yes, my sorrow," Emily replied, her voice laced with a bitter resignation. "I have it all day, all night, everywhere I go. My life sucks, but at least I got you." The entity paused, a flicker of confusion passing through its dark mist. It was unaccustomed to such acceptance, its existence fueled by fear and terror, not this resigned acknowledgement. In the days that followed, Emily's fear of the entity gradually dissipated. Her life was so permeated with fear and sorrow that the presence of the entity became just another part of her grim reality. It was no longer a source of terror, but a constant in her world of chaos and pain. The entity, puzzled by this change, continued to visit Emily. However, the dynamic had shifted. It was no longer the predator looming over its prey. Instead, it became something akin to a dark, twisted companion in her loneliness. Emily's interactions with the entity took on a new tone. She spoke to it about her day, her bullies, her longing for a friend. The entity listened, its form hovering in the darkness, absorbing her words, her sorrow. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. Emily's constant exposure to the entity, her acceptance of it as part of her life, began to diminish its power. The entity, once a formidable presence, started to appear less substantial, its form flickering like a shadow under a clouded moon. Emily's transformation was subtle. Her fear, once a palpable thing that consumed her, began to recede. In facing the entity night after night, in accepting its presence as a part of her sorrowful existence, she had inadvertently begun to rob it of its power over her. In this strange, dark companionship, Emily found a bizarre form of strength. The entity, once a symbol of her deepest fears, had become a testament to her resilience, a dark reminder of her ability to endure even in the face of despair. In the quiet of her room, Emily sat on her bed, the entity beside her, a faded form, its once intimidating presence now diminished. She looked at it, an idea forming in her mind. Well, as you need fear, what if I were to tell you where these girls live? The ones who bully me. Maybe you could go scare their pants off instead, Emily suggested, a hint of mischief in her voice. The entity seemed to ponder this, its form wavering like a wisp of smoke. Then it uttered one word: fear. Oh, I think you'll get a lot of fear from them, Emily said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Though they are bullies to me. My mom often says that bullies act out because they're having a hard time too, maybe at home or with other things. The next day at school, Emily walked down the hallway, her steps light, a sense of anticipation in the air. As she passed one of the girls who usually tormented her, she noticed a change. The girl looked haggard, with dark circles under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept. Another girl approached her, concern etched on her face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Oh, nothing," the bully muttered, her voice barely audible, her eyes darting around nervously. Back in her room that evening, Emily found the entity more solid than it had ever been. Its form was clearer, more defined, as if it had been revitalized. Emily couldn't help but smile. "So, it was you," she said, a sense of satisfaction in her voice. The entity responded with a single word: fear. In that moment, Emily realized the power dynamic had shifted. The entity, once a harbinger of her own fears, had become an instrument of her will, a shadowy ally against those who had made her life miserable. For the first time, Emily felt a sense of control, a glimmer of empowerment in her otherwise bleak world. Yet, as she looked at the entity, its form stronger and more present than ever, a flicker of doubt crept into her mind. Was she using the entity, or was it using her? The line between empowerment and moral compromise blurred, leaving Emily to ponder the consequences of her newfound power. The entity, with its one-word utterances, remained an enigma, its intentions unclear, but for now, it was a companion in her quest for retribution, a dark echo of her own pain and resilience. Emily walked into school the next day with a newfound sense of confidence, her encounter with the entity still fresh in her mind. She felt different, stronger somehow, as if she were no longer the victim in her own story. As she navigated the crowded hallways, the main bully cornered her, pinning her against the wall with a menacing glare. "What you got for me today?" the bully sneered, expecting Emily to cower as usual. Instead, Emily met her gaze with a calm, almost eerie smile. "What would you like?" "I have a lot to offer," she replied, her voice steady. Confused and thrown off by Emily's unexpected demeanor, the bully released her grip and shoved Emily to the floor, muttering, "Weirdo." Emily looked up, her smile unwavering. There was a new power in her, a secret edge that the bully couldn't comprehend. Back at home, Emily sat in her room, conversing with the now familiar entity. "This one seems to have a lot of issues. Pain, sorrow, fear. I think she'll be perfect for you," Emily said, a hint of darkness in her tone. The entity turned to her, its form more substantial than before, and whispered, "Fear." Emily's smile broadened. She was no longer a mere observer in her life. She was a participant, shaping her own narrative. A few days later, Emily noticed the bully again. The girl who once exuded confidence and cruelty now looked haggard, as if she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were hollow, her movements sluggish, a shell of her former self. As Emily passed by, she whispered under her breath, "Sorrow." No one heard her, but the word hung in the air like a dark promise. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to thrive at school. She made friends, her grades improved, and she found joy in small, everyday moments. The entity visited her often, each encounter strengthening her resolve and her sense of control over her life. Her home life, too, seemed to be on the upswing. Her relationship with her mother grew stronger, and the house, once a place of fear and an uncertainty, now felt like a sanctuary. But as Emily lay in bed each night, listening to the whispers of the entity, she couldn't shake the feeling that this newfound peace came at a price. The shadow that had once haunted her now empowered her, and she wondered what that meant for her soul. The lines between right and wrong, justice and revenge, were blurred in the shadow of the entity. Emily had found a way to cope with her pain, but the question remained, at what cost? Emily sat at the breakfast table with her mother, the morning light casting a warm glow across the room. For the first time in a long while, there was a genuine sense of happiness in her voice. "Mom, things are going so well in school now. I've been making friends and feeling so alive," Emily shared, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "That's wonderful, Emily," her mother exclaimed, relief evident in her tone. "Tell me about your friends." Emily began eagerly. "There's Jo, my first friend. She's really nice, but she's always sad. Her family is super strict, and they discipline her like in the old days. Whenever I'm with her, I can almost feel her sorrow." She then moved on to another friend. "And there's Sarah. Her parents also split up, but they're always arguing. She brings all that pain to school with her." As Emily spoke, a sudden realization dawned on her. Her words trailed off, and she fell silent, her expression turning introspective. She thought about the entity, how it fed on her fear and sorrow, and then she thought about her friends, about how their pain and sadness seemed to invigorate her, giving her a sense of strength and control. A chilling thought crept into her mind. Was she becoming like the entity, feeding off the pain and sorrow of others? The thought was unsettling, casting a shadow over her newfound happiness. She looked up at her mother, who was watching her with a concerned expression. "Emily, is everything okay?" her mother asked. "Yeah, Mum, everything's fine," Emily replied, forcing a smile. But inside, a turmoil of emotions was brewing. She was no longer sure if the positive changes in her life were the result of her own growth, or if they were fueled by something darker, something she had not intended. The revelation that she might be mirroring the entity's behavior was alarming. It raised questions about the nature of her recent transformation. Was she unwittingly absorbing the negative emotions of others, just as the entity absorbed hers? As Emily left for school that day, her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She began to observe her interactions with her friends more closely, trying to understand the nature of the connection she felt with them. The joy of making friends was now tinged with the fear that she might be using their pain for her own gain, just as the entity had used hers. This realization marked a turning point for Emily. She knew she had to confront the truth about herself and the entity that lingered in the shadows of her life. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she understood that it was necessary to untangle the complex web of emotions and influences that had come to define her existence. Emily met her friends at school, but their conversations were no longer a source of comfort. As they shared their nightly pains and sadness, Emily felt a surge of strength and vigor coursing through her. The realization struck her like a lightning bolt. She was feeding on their sorrow, just as the entity fed on hers. She rushed home, her heart pounding, her mind racing with fear and confusion. Her mother was still at work, leaving the house eerily silent. Bursting into her room, Emily confronted the empty air. "What have you done to me?" The entity materialized, more solid and menacing than ever. "Sorrow," it whispered, its voice echoing the depth of Emily's realization. In that moment, the entity fully engulfed Emily. It had been feeding on her sorrow, growing stronger with each passing day. But now, it wasn't just feeding on her, it was merging with her. Emily had become a conduit for the entity, her own sorrow amplified by the sorrows of her friends. She had become an integral part of the entity, a vessel for its dark hunger. Emily was never seen again. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the community. The police searched tirelessly, but no trace of her was found. Her mother was left in a state of inconsolable despair, and the school held a vigil in her memory. Rumors and theories abounded, but the truth remained a mystery. Time passed, and eventually, a new family moved into the house. A young boy, an only child, found himself struggling to adjust to the new environment, missing his old friends and life. One night, as he lay in bed, tears streaming down his face, he felt an inexplicable weight on his legs. Trembling, he looked up and saw a ghostly figure, the image of a young girl, translucent and sorrowful. It was Emily, lost in the grip of the entity, now a part of its haunting legacy. "Sorrow," she whispered, her voice a chilling echo of the entity's call. The boy lay frozen, staring at the spectral figure, as the room filled with a cold, mournful air. The house, with its dark history, had claimed another soul, binding Emily to its walls, her story becoming part of its eerie tapestry. In the haunting whisper of sorrow, the cycle continued, a reminder of the pain and fear that had consumed Emily. Her presence, now merged with the entity, lingered in the house, a ghostly testament to the cost of unaddressed pain and the dark power of sorrow.
And if you're still looking to fulfill your thirst for more horror, don't forget to check out this next video, unless of course you're frozen with fear already.